Smart security systems to homes and businesses. Call Goldilocks at 708-889-5600.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Dan. Chicago's Morning Answer. Thanks for joining us. The BBB, as we were discussing the 6 o'clock hour, one aspect of it, the social safety net piece, and the hue and cry coming from the left about people will die anytime there's even modest reductions in spend or changing of incentives that move people away from government dependency. Somehow that is a bad thing. But with respect to the actual dollars and cents of it, the impact on financial markets, on small business formation, wanted to get perspective on that from Christopher Whalen, who will join us momentarily. But before we get there, David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, Obama's favorite Republican, you'll remember, which is to say a Democrat, on PBS over the weekend, providing some advice and counsel to Democrats in terms of how to message the BBB for maximum impact on their electoral chances in 2026. A little bit more polished than Jimmy Carville's "this thing stinks and you need to get sewer fans." Here's what David Brooks said.
Yeah, him too. I think the one thing I would say if I were a Democrat is Donald Trump won election on the back of the working class. He has betrayed you. You have been betrayed by this guy. Americans are in a mood where many of them feel betrayed. And so Republicans have won because they tell a betrayal story. The elites are betraying you. But Democrats now have a betrayal story to tell. And so you got to go with the tide of history. And the tide of history is like 68%, not just Republicans, think the elites have betrayed us. And now Democrats have a plausible version. This guy, he said he was going to help you in Youngstown, Ohio. He's helping Palm Beach. And that's a story that they could do. If they hit that populist note a little harder, that might be effective.
Yeah, I heard that from the rank and file members of the Dem Socialist Party over the weekend, too. But I'm just unclear how he sold out the working class. David Brooks didn't provide any detail. He betrayed the working class how? By eliminating a $7,500 electric vehicle credit so that people making $50,000 a year can subsidize people buying a $90,000 Tesla. How's that betraying the working class? How is maintaining lower tax rates for middle income and upper income families betraying the working people of America? I'm unclear on that, so that's why we have Chris Whalen to provide some clarity. Chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, LLC, editor for the Institutional Risk Analyst, and author of Inflated: Money, Debt, and the American Dream, second edition. Chris, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan.
What's your takeaway from the BBB as passed and signed into law, and David Brooks's, and you know, that's reflective of what they think their rhetorical approach should be, that recommendation?
Well, I think Donald Trump has done what he promised to do, and it's not going to make people on the left very happy. He's trying to pare back the socialist welfare state. But for small business people, as you just said, this is a big deal. Otherwise, their taxes would have gone up quite a lot. There are a lot of small things in this bill that I might have tweaked one way or another. But I think what was interesting is that the conservatives in the House folded entirely. They had threatened to demand more cuts. And they, at the end of the day, were told that there were no more changes permitted. And that was it. They had an up or down vote. So that's how you get things done in Washington. It's
Call the
really
question.
the short circuit.
Yeah.
Well, when you put a gun to their head, they'll do what you tell them to do. That's about it.
Well, some of those New York Republicans that you're familiar with, they did end up getting not quite the SALT increase, cap increase they wanted, but a quadrupling of it, which isn't bad. You have to be happy about your $40,000 SALT deduction cap now. Better than 10.
Well, it certainly helps. I mean, here in the Hudson Valley, we're grateful. But, home prices in New York have not been coming down because there's no new construction. That's one of the secrets of blue states. They keep home prices up because they don't allow any construction. California is the most inhospitable, unaffordable state in the country when it comes to real estate. So, it is what it is.
And interestingly, one of the things the act does on the energy front is to use the Congressional Review Act to revoke EPA waivers that allowed California to enforce stricter emissions rules, including zero ZEV mandates. So they're also providing, this bill also provides more latitude for states at the even the deep blue states like California to be more friendly in a regulatory way than they have been currently.
Well, yeah, but look, California is a very dysfunctional place. It continues to grow, even though people are leaving en masse to go to cheaper states. Most of the people I've worked with in the mortgage business over the last 20 years have had to relocate. Whole parts of that industry have had to move to Texas because it's just too expensive to keep employees in California, which is extraordinary. So, it'll continue until it doesn't. But this same thing could be said about Washington, Dan.
Yeah.
I would have liked to see more cuts because Scott Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, has just mutated into Janet Yellen, and he's going to finance everything in T-bills.
Wow,
no, listen,
statement.
That's Argentina. I cut my teeth in Mexico and Argentina in the 70s and the 80s working on debt restructuring, okay? When you see a government front-loading all of their public debt with T-bills, that is not a good sign. That's a day or two before the IMF team shows up for the restructuring negotiations.
So does that mean you're going to be running under the banner of Elon Musk's new party?
No. Isn't it funny that Elon can't tear himself away from Washington and get back to work? I've had so many friends who've been, seduced by Washington. They think that they can make a difference, but they can't because democracy is on its own little trajectory. There's no way that one person or even a group of people can change how things are headed, unfortunately. It just is what it is.
That's a tough campaign slogan. I'm running to not make a difference because I can't. You gotta. But I mean, what this BBB presents is sort of evidence to the statement you just made. I mean, that's the problem. Until there's a mentality shift in what the American public or the majority of it thinks about the role of government, the federal government in their lives, then yeah, you're going to have these meatball Sundays like the president signed into law.
Completely. And I thought, the television celebration of 4th of July was perfectly produced and sanitized. It was almost impossible to believe that we were in the same country we were when Joe Biden was in the White House. I used to go down to the mall when I was a kid years ago with a friend of mine's pickup truck, just load up the back with my friends and a cooler of beer and sit there and watch the fireworks. But now it's become political theater.
I wanted to get your take on one just sort of esoteric aspect of this. I got this from a friend of mine who's got a venture capital fund that's based in New York, and he sent out a missive talking about the qualified small business stock tax provision, which was enhanced somewhat under the BBB to provide more incentive for business formation, just in terms of eliminating capital gains tax for equity investments into small businesses. I mean, is that substantial, or is that something that's nice but it's marginal?
I would say it's marginal. If a business makes sense, you don't need tax gimmies to make it work. Unfortunately, most, half of small businesses fail every year. They are very volatile. They usually have key man risk, which is the biggest reason for failure. So, they keep throwing these little incremental helps, if you will, or bits of assistance from the federal government. But the bottom line is that we can't have private sector growth in a stable and reasonable way if the federal government is taking most of the capital out of the market. That's the problem.
Well, it's funny you mention Argentina, because we have this concurrent news that Argentina's economy under Milei grew 7.6% in Q2. And we've got, and I've been watching this too, because I just think it's a fascinating Randian real world side by side comparison in terms of what we're doing versus what Malay is doing. And there's some similarities and some differences, particularly on trade, there's differences. But in terms of what he's producing now, of course, Argentina is starting from a much smaller base, and it's much easier to reverse hyperinflationary policies and so forth. But the results are the results.
But it's not that easy. Remember, about 40% of Argentina had been co-opted by the left, and they were living on subsidies for fuel and food and everything else. Milei has ripped that away. And the only reason he was able to do that is that things had gotten so bad that nobody argued with him.
Yeah.
We're not quite there yet, but believe me, we're going to eventually be back to March 1933 when members of Congress are going to be standing on the floor of the House and the Senate looking at one another like, what do we do? And then somebody's going to walk into the room and tell them what to do. That's essentially how it's going to play. And that's FDR, by the way.
Well,
I mean, Franklin Roosevelt did.
Well, but I mean, but if nothing else, Milei provides a canary in the coal mine to say, if you have the political will, this is the thing you can do, and it's going to produce. Yeah. You're going to take a lot of heat on the front end, but it's going to produce on the back end.
Well, yeah, but to your earlier point, right? If you get rid of these policies, guess what? Your economy grows a lot.
Yeah.
If we could really roll back a lot of the New Deal nonsense in the U.S., we could easily grow fast enough to take care of the federal budget deficit. But we also have to stop adding to the deficit. That's the hard part. Freeze spending for 4 years. Don't let it go up any more than the rate of inflation. Okay? Because this thing grows. That's the neat thing about the United States. We grow. So if you just slow it down for a while, you could catch up. And then we have more than enough assets to take care of this long term. That's not a problem, Dan, if we have the right people in Washington. That's the issue, of course. How do we get the right people in Washington?
Well, you can't. No, it's what Friedman said. The trick of politics is getting the wrong people to do the right thing. That's the trick.
Precisely.
But so I'm give me your near-term prognostication, because on the one hand, you're saying we're knocking on the door of 1933. On the other hand, you're saying we have the long-term, net worth, if you will, to accommodate even what we would consider profligate spending.
If we start to make the right decisions, then we can fix it. As we are today, adding to the budget deficit the way we are, I think we're going to see higher long-term rates. In other words, the stuff the Fed does not control. And they will push short-term rates down, which will help a little bit. You'll have a little bit of a boom in mortgages next year after. But then we're going to have a maxi reset in home prices, I think. We're going to go back down to 2019, 2020 levels of home prices, right before the next general election, by the way. So that is the issue, is we still haven't done enough on the fiscal side to really get ahead of this thing. And that's what worries me, because, during COVID, really most of the period since 2008, when the Fed pushed short-term rates down, long-term rates fell too. Mm-hmm. But that may not happen this time. We may still have 7% mortgage rates, even if they cut Fed funds down into the 3s or the 2s. Think about that. That's not what we expect, right? So I think the whole population of politicians and policymakers are in for a little bit of a surprise.
You tweeted out in response to a post from Pulte that Jerome Powell is late to the dance when it comes to cutting rates. You write, we've got some deflation building. Commercial loan rates are falling due to slack demand, and commercial real estate credit is dreadful. So distill that in more detail for us.
Well, for the past 3 quarters, I follow the banks. I publish an index on the top 100 banks. And when you see loan rates and also deposit rates falling, what that tells you is that there's not a lot of demand for loans, and the banks don't need the deposits. So they're pushing back and saying, no, we're going to lower our deposit rates. You see this in a lot of different parts of the commercial side of the equation, right? Commercial real estate, private equity, which is a train wreck. And by the way, the Fed just gave all the banks a pass. They didn't look at their private equity exposures, which are probably the worst sector in finance right now. So Powell throws them a rose, Goldman particularly. But I think that really there's a deflationary aspect to what's going on in multifamily. You see this in Chicago. Same thing with commercial, not consumer. Consumer is still very quiet, Dan, which is troubling because everybody keeps expecting this consumer-led recession, but it doesn't happen. Instead, we're having, death and destruction on the commercial side of the ledger. And I worry about that a lot. I think the Fed should have cut rates last year. They are at least a year late.
With respect to the BBB, I mean, is the holding the marginal rates harmless? Is that the most important feature of it, or is there another aspect of the on the incentive side, on the supply side, if you will, that is particularly important?
Well, the tax rates were the big issue, making the Trump 1 cuts permanent and not having a big change. Because let's face it, they're trying to get through the midterm election, right? That's why we have extended the debt ceiling by $5 trillion, so we don't have to have another vote until after the midterms.
Rand Paul not happy about
that. So I
that.
think that was the headline very much.
Chris Whalen, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, LLC, editor of the Institutional Risk Analyst, and author of the book Inflated: Money, Debt, and the American Dream, second edition. Chris, thank you as always.
Have a great day, Dan.
You too. And Chris Whalen joins us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Are you living with dry AMD? If so, you could be on the road to geographic atrophy, or GA, a condition that leads to